Golly, Uncle Mark, this is an interesting spread of equipment. What does all this gear not have in common? We've got a Martini Henry, a Garand, an FN49. We have two 1911s, and there's a reason why there's two. Colt Woodsman and, golly, a Roth Krinka. Yikes. Okay, they're all here because I want to talk about Headspace. And each one of these pieces of equipment, headspaces and locks differently, and they don't. So like most things, let's just get on down this quick rabbit hole shot and talk about headspace as it applies to a firearm. There are four different ways you can do headspace in a gun. And I'm going to say that before I define the things that you need to know. There's rimless, there's rimmed, there's, I'm going to call it on the mouth. I'm just going to call these mouth spacers. And that's an automatic beam generation facility. And then there's a belt. So I'm just going to tell you there's four primary methods which you can use in order to headspace a gun. The belted one's headspace on the rim. We'll explain that in a minute. These cartridges are the ACP series. They all headspace right here on the front end of the cartridge where the projectile sticks out. There's a definite step there. There are rimmed rounds, and that means rim fire, shotgun, there's handgun, and then they're all the way up into the rifle stuff, and then there's rimless, 30-06, and then that's an 8mm sitting there. So what does all this mean? All right, at the end of the day, when you lock a gun shut, there has to be a place where the buck stops when you lock a gun shut. So say, for instance, we have a bolt here. How do I want to demonstrate this? All right, here we go. Here's a barrel. We're going to do a rimmed round first because it's the easiest. If we have a barrel and here's the walls of the barrel, and we put a cartridge in here, hey, let me change colors. So we're just going to do the easiest one because it's been around the longest. I put a rimmed cartridge in here like this. Is that extra color showing up? Maybe, maybe not. So here's a cartridge with a rim on it. And we're going to stick that in there, and it's going to have this nice fat bullet sticking out of it right here. There we go. And we have a rim on this. The mouth of the case may or may not be touching anything, but in this particular case, there is a line right here where the front of this rim touches, and then something is going to hold this shut. All right, something is going to hold this shut. And we don't care, because ultimately, whatever is holding this in the back end of this is going to be tied off to the action of the gun back here somewhere. And the space, the distance between here and here is called the abutment space. Here we go, abutment. Let me spell this out. All right. The abutment is the rock, and the front end of whatever you're headspacing against right here is the hard place. And this distance is your headspace. Now I'm going to explain this. You cannot put one of 100 million cartridges in this barrel and have the thickness of this rim be identical every single time. If we had a round in there, it'd be sitting right there like that, right? So there has to be ever so slightly a small amount of wiggle room right behind this, all right? Then we touch up against the back end of whatever's holding the cartridge in, and then we go back to the abutment right here. whatever it's locking up solid against. And I'm going to show you a variety of guns and show you there's a variety of ways to do this. Let's take an FN49, for example. So here's what I mean by the abutment. Let's look at this FN49. There's a surface right here, and that surface is where the bolt, as it comes forward, locks in. So the bolt locks down, and the rear end of the cartridge is now supported in a direct line down through that crossbolt and into the walls of the receiver. So this is one style of abutment, a direct lock breech rifle. That's one way of doing it. There are other ways of doing it. You can actually, let's say for instance, we put a pivot point right here and this thing was free to swing through an arc. We put a pivot point here and we dropped this down, stuck a cartridge in it and rolled it up. We have a Martini Henry right here. When you open this up, the abutment drops, and then the place to put the cartridge in is in the back here. Let me maneuver. I'm a little tight for space. The cartridge goes in the back side of this thing right there, and then you pop it up and you lock it shut, and it pivots up into position and it traps the rear end. And the headspace is the distance between the abutment, which on this gun is this pin. This is where the buck stops, right here, right? It's between that pin and the back end of the barrel, because that's what the cartridge headspace is up against. This happens to be a 22 caliber Martini, but it doesn't matter because rims are rims. So these were rimmed. These were the rimless, but they headspace on the case mouth. Totally rimless. And then we have a one over there. Okay, so I put a clean towel out because I want to talk about the ACP. Here we got a 45, a 380, and a 32 caliber automatic Colt pistol, and they have a very defined case mouth. Okay. The case mouth is sharp. This is sharp right here. And then the projectile sits inside the case mouth, like that. And it's crimped down in there like that. So you have a sharp edge here that's very delineated. And if you feel factory 45, there's a very sharp edge right there. And if you hand load the automatic Colt pistol rounds, and you smear hard lube or you smear lead up against this, the head spacing disappears. These right here, this body diameter is constant. I know I overdrew it, but this is the same distance as here. So now when you load this into the chamber in the gun, here's the chamber in the gun. Let me get that out of the way. There's the chamber in the gun like this, and there's the barrel. All right. And of course you're rifled in here like this, right? So when you load this in, this is your datum line right here. And whatever you close up against the back of this, and in this particular case, in let's say a 1911, the barrel in a 1911 does lock into the slide. You can actually see the barrel kick up slightly. It pops down and then it unlocks, right? So at the end of the day, there is nothing locking this barrel and slide forward. There's nothing locking it shut. The barrel is locked to the slide, and this is a union that's inviolate here until the gun unlocks. But at the end of the day, what is truly holding this gun shut is a huge spring, pretty big, 18, 19 pound spring that's actually pushing forward on the slide, bang. So your headspace is pretty much defined by the length of the cartridge here, you see. So if you do your 45 ACPs wrong and you get the cartridge length wrong, the gun will lock forward in different places. You can make an argument that the 1911 actually locks shut on that row of lock and lugs up on top, and it does. You can definitely, if you get a 45 too long, you can hold it out of battery. But Headspace is how much rattle room do we have when the gun is locked all the way forward and shut. So again, it's the distance between the forward, whatever stops it in the front, and wherever the abutment winds up. And there it is. There's not a whole lot of rattle room on a 1911. When a 1911 shuts, it's shut, but you gotta have a couple of thousandths of an inch in here. You got to have some space for production errors, and you have to have a sharp edge. So that's pretty much how it's done in the ACP series. Big, dumb, and slow. Still winning the race. You can just leave it on here. This brings us to rimless rounds. Let's look at rimless here. The rimless round has we're flush in the back. So the rimless round, and I'm going to move this training aid out of the way here just a little bit. Here's the cartridge. You have a definable taper to it. And then it has the extractor groove there. Extractor groove there. All right. This body taper is about somewhere in the neighborhood of 4/1000ths of an inch, which is not a whole lot of millimeters. But that's the taper from here to here. And halfway down, right here, there is a line. It's an imaginary line that goes around the chamber, and that's called the datum line. That's still on camera? Yeah. That's the datum line right there. And that is kind of an arbitrary place where they measure the distance from the bolt face back to whatever the heck it locks into. We'll just put a set of lock and lugs back here like this. And then these are the fixed locking points in the receiver right here. All right. From this to the datum line is your headspace measurement. All right. That's headspace. All right. If you hear a little tinking in the background, that's because there's a number 4 Mark I being reassembled after parkerizing. So just take a deep breath and inhale the ambiance that I am enjoying while I'm explaining headspace. So let's keep moving here. The distance from the datum line to the back end is headspace, and there's got to be a little bit of rattle room right here. There's got to be some space. All right? Because not every single one of these cartridges is going to be the same. And it's one of the things that they were wrestling with. Some countries made the jump to rimless rounds sooner. Some stayed with the rim round. Some countries have stayed with the rim round 7.62 by 54R because it works in weapons that it was designed for. However, the true headspace of a rimless round is dictated by how well you can make that cartridge a couple of billion times this year. In a rimmed round, all you have to do is hold the thickness of that rim constant. You just have to get that right. But in a rimless round, the entire cartridge has got to be right. And it's got to be right every single time. If you push on this bolt too hard, you can cram this up in here and it might work. If you don't push on it hard enough, it'll rattle around too much and it'll give the primer, here, the firing pin is right here. Okay, and how far out that firing pin sticks will determine how hard it gets hit And then you can get varying ignition levels out of the primer, which means you get velocity variations, which means you get vertical stringing, until finally the cartridge just stretches enough that it parts and it blows gas all over the rear end of the gun, and that's not a good thing. We've sectioned this barrel here to show you this barrel was trash. I mean, it's trash. Wow, trash. Let's store hydrochloric acid inside of the barrel for a year and see what the rifling looks like. Anyway, right here is where the datum ring is. And we've milled this in such a way that it's actually holding onto the cartridge. And you can see how it just sets up in. The case head's unsupported. The rear of the bolt comes in and locks shut. Locking shut is significantly easier to demonstrate with a weapon like a Garand. So let's look at a Garand here for a second. In the Garand, you can actually see as the bolt lugs turn right there. So the abutment in this gun is right there off the end of my finger. That's where the abutment is. That's where the buck stops inside the gun. And that rolls. Now on a bolt, does it matter whether or not a gas piston is rotating this bolt and pulling it back, or you pop up a bolt handle and haul it back? No, it really doesn't matter one way or the other. So this is a rimmed round as it applies. Now, I'm rimless. I'm sorry, I apologize. That's a rimless round. All we are doing on the belted round is moving the rim up around the back side of the cartridge. And what we're looking for here in this particular case is, here's the rim, is to have all the advantages of a rimmed round and yet still be able to feed it out of a box magazine. This made a lot of sense when they were trying to make magazine rifles work in hot continents against animals that would kill you. So in this particular case, where the arrows are is showing you where the front of the belt is, and in the back end it works just the same way on the abutment. So what do we do with a handgun that doesn't lock shut? It really doesn't. You can see the back of the chamber here. The cartridge just sits up against the back of this chamber face, and then when you drop the slide, it actually drops right up against it. There's zero room. There's no cut for the rim in the back. There's no cut for the rim in the barrel. So by definition, headspace in this gun is 0. It comes up and then there's a little gap there and you can see the blue line through it. So in an unlocked breech gun, that especially in an automatic unlocked breech gun, the spring makes headspace be 0. Now in this odd duck, this is a 1911 that's chambered in 455 Webley Mark I. It's a rimmed round, and you can do a 1911 with a rimmed round. You can do it if you set it up, and it headspaces off the rim, not off the case mouth. It's an odd duck, and it's just another way to do it, and a super stupid rare gun. Now we have the Roth Krinka. Let's take a look at this bad boy. Yes, this is a horse pistol from the way back. Shoots a 9x23 Steyr round. This one is probably going to headspace off the case mouth. We're going to make them out of 38 Super rounds. Rare, and huge. It kind of looks like a year 1 Star Trek phaser, doesn't it? Investigation, but it's just cool that that gun and the regular 1911 work exactly the same way. And they're not too far apart in lineage. But that's Axis of Awesome right there. So anyway, I'm hoping I explained headspace pretty well. Most cartridges are very, very thick down at the base. There's a lot of brass down there. This shotgun shell has almost no support. Headspace is actually more important in a shotgun than it probably is in a rifle because you're containing less pressure, but you got a lot more area, and it's actually quite critical. So there you go. Last thing I'll leave you with is this. Here's a couple of ones you don't see too often. I'm going to finish out with a couple of rare rim rounds to show you these things that they're older than all get out. The one on the left is actually a rimmed 9mm shot shell. Then we have a Webley round. We have a 50-70 government, an 11mm Gras, and a 45-110. Talk about some thumpers. Well, I hope this cleared up some of your Headspace questions. I'm imagining that it's clear as mud. And cue outro music.